Verileri işleme. Bir nesneyi istediğiniz tüm açılardan yakalayıp yeterli sayıda tarama oluşturduktan sonra bir 3D model oluşturabilirsiniz. Bu bölüm, sürecin ayrıntılı bir açıklamasını sunar. Nihai modeli oluşturma süreci aşağıdaki aşamaları içerir. Taramaları gözden geçirme ve taramaları düzenleme. Tarama hizalaması. Küresel kayıt. Model oluşturma, füzyon. Modelleri düzenleme. Tekstüre.
We'll go over the interface of the Artex Studio software and its basic controls. To launch Artex Studio, double-click the corresponding shortcut on your desktop. There are three main activity zones in the Artex Studio interface. The Workspace panel, on the right side of the UI, contains information about all the scans and models which were created or imported into the current project. In the Control panel, on the left side of the UI, you can start a scanning session, apply the necessary algorithms, and use various editing tools. The 3D window in the center displays all currently active 3D models and other graphical information. Artex Studio project files are saved in an SProj format. A project includes folders which contain the project's encoded scan data and editing history. Please note how the data is displayed after being loaded in. Each project can consist of two different types of data, scans and fusions. Scans are the raw information you get after scanning. To examine the components which make up a scan, you can double-click on the scan's name in the Workspace window on the right. As you can see, a scan consists of multiple three-dimensional snapshots, which are aligned with each other during the scanning process. These snapshots are called frames. If tracking is lost while scanning, your data will be split into multiple scans and stored in a group. In addition to scans, the project can also contain fusions. These are polygonal models which are usually the result of post-processing scan data. But they can also be imported into the software or be individually captured frames. If you select a model by clicking on its name and then click on the Properties button at the bottom of the Workspace panel, you can see the following information: the global registration status, the scanner type, the number of polygons, and the size of the model in RAM. All the scans captured during scanning or loaded into the software are displayed in the workspace. They can be either visible or invisible. The visibility of a scan is set on the left side of the workspace panel. If the checkmark is selected, the object will be displayed in the 3D window, and all the algorithms you run will be applied to that scan. Algorithms are not applied to invisible objects or scans. You can switch the visibility of objects between Select All, Deselect All, and Invert Selection. In Artex Studio, you can switch between several modes of displaying your data. You can switch the color texture on or off, as well as set different rendering parameters. Also, you can switch between different preset viewpoints. Let's look at the ways to move around your 3D model in the 3D window. Double-click on a model to place a temporary rotation center on it. The temporary rotation center is marked by a small sphere. Use the left mouse button to rotate the model around the temporary rotation center. Use the right mouse button or mouse scroll to zoom in and out of the model. To pan around the model, hold down both the left and right mouse buttons. To the left of the 3D window is the Control panel. The Scan tab is used to control the scanning process. In this tab, you can also choose the scanning mode and the device which you would like to use. The Autopilot tab allows the user to automatically generate models from their raw data without having to manually post-process scans. The Edit panel will help you modify the ready model or edit the raw data. The Tools tab contains a number of algorithms grouped according to their uses. The registration algorithms are used to refine your scan data and improve accuracy. The algorithms for creating polygonal models are in the Fusion section. Post-processing algorithms will help you edit your model. We will look at them more closely in future tutorials. The Align tab will help you merge your data if the object was captured in several positions. The Fix Holes tab will help you smooth edges and fill holes in a fused model, as well as create bridges between mesh islands. The Texture tab can transfer your color texture from raw scans or other models to your fusions. The Construct tab is used to extract CAD data from your 3D models. And in the Measures tab, there are several measuring tools.
Maksimum hata ve kayıt kalitesi. Hata, çerçeve kayıt kalitesini yansıtan parametredir. Taramalar için tüm çerçeveler arasındaki maksimum değeri gösterir. Değer ne kadar büyük olursa, hizalama o kadar az doğru olur. Stüdyo, yalnızca hassas kayıt, hizalama ve genel kaydı geçen taramalar için dikkate değer değerler görüntüler. Taramaları gözden geçirme. Bir 3B model oluşturmaya başladığınızda, taramalarınızı önceden işleyerek başlamak isteyebilirsiniz. Yanlış hizalanmış alanları, varsa, ayrı taramalara ayırın ve istenmeyen nesneleri sahneden çıkarın. Aşağıdaki sorunlarla karşılaşabilirsiniz. Solda kötü geometri, ortada tarama yanlışlığı ve sağda karelerde yakalanmış eller. Yanlış hizalanmış çerçeveler, sol, küçük boyut, nesne üzerindeki yetersiz sayıda geometrik özellik veya bir çerçevedeki yetersiz sayıda çokgen nedeniyle oluşabilir. Yanlış hizalanmış parçalar, orta, gerçek zamanlı hizalama algoritması yeni çerçevenin konumunu önceki çerçevelere göre hatalı olarak belirlediğinde meydana gelir. Çerçevedeki istenmeyen nesneler, sağ.
You scan objects and capture data. Now, not every single one of them needs to be adjusted every time, but I'm going to go over the important ones that you would check before you start scanning. So let's start. We'll start at the top and kind of work our way down. So if you're using the Artex Space Spider, which I currently have connected, or the Artex Spider, it will have a temperature readout up here at the top, showing the current temperature, the optimal temperature. Now, the Artex Space Spider and the Artex Spider have to be in a certain temperature range in order to capture the most accurate data. Now, if your temperature is too low, it will give you an, maybe when you first plug the scanner in, it'll give you another readout right under here in this empty space that tells you that the scanner is warming up and how much time is left before it's warmed up. So you could, of course, start scanning immediately, even if it's still warming up. But again, you're going to get the most accurate data when it is in the correct temperature range. If you have connected the EVA or the EVA Lite, you don't have to worry about that. It'll just say scanner connected, and then you can continue on. It does not have a temperature readout. All right, moving down, there are a few buttons here that you can use to start and stop scanning, but I like to just use the buttons on the back of the scanner. Now, let me show you here how this works. If you press up once on the back of the scanner, this is a little slide button on the Spider and Space Spider. On the EVA and EVA Lite, there's a little rocker switch. Press the top button or the bottom button. This one is just a slide up and down. So I'm going to slide it up once to start my preview, and when I'm in preview, it shows exactly what you're seeing right here on the screen. Now, if it's the EVA Lite, you don't have any color. This allows you to look at your distance meter, which is this green bar right here. And this waveform, when you're pointed at your object, this waveform needs to be in the center 3 sections for the best results. So that's something that you want to watch when you're scanning. All right, so if I've started my preview by pressing up once, I can start scanning by pressing up again, or pressing that start button right there on the in the software itself, and then I can press down on the scanner to stop. Now, again, you could do all that right there using the mouse, but it's a lot easier to just keep your hands on the scanner and use the button on the scanner than it is to try to hold the scanner and make adjustments and start and stop with your mouse over here in the software. So I usually just use the buttons on the back. All right, so when I'm going to start scanning an object, I press up once to start my preview, and there's a couple things on this tab that you need to check before you actually start scanning. So again, I've got my distance meter, so I want to make sure I'm at the proper distance. I have, right here, I've got my scanning speed. You want to just leave that as is. And then you want to check your texture brightness. That's one of the first things I check. And this is going to vary from object to object. I'll show you that here. This is just a visual adjustment, so I'm going to point this here. And let me just do this right like that. All right. So I'm at the proper distance here. Now notice this has some dark and light colors in it. If you're too bright, it'll start looking all blown out like that, and that's not good. You're going to have potentially have bad tracking, and then if you have to reapply color later on, it's not going to look good. So, and that might be a little dark. It might be okay, but I'll brighten this up just a little bit, and that looks fine for this object. Now I mentioned before that you're going to adjust this each time before you scan different objects. So this looks pretty good over here on this one, right? But if I move over, I've got this little USB SD card reader here. Notice how dark this is. So on some objects, you may actually have to adjust that so that you can start seeing that color texture. So you can actually see the text on this object now. So that brightness works pretty well for this object. But if I move back over here, it's too bright for that one. So again, that's something that you check every time before you start scanning. So I'm going to adjust my texture brightness. And then something else you can adjust, this isn't all the time, but if you're scanning certain objects that are more difficult to scan, like shiny objects or dark objects, like really dark objects, you may have to adjust your sensitivity. So this slider here, and you can only adjust this and texture brightness when you're in preview like I am right now. But this slider, and I don't know if I mentioned it, if you expand the advanced tab, this slider right here, this is a noise filter, basically, is what it comes down to. When it's on normal, it's filtering out most noise, and you're going to get the most ideal scans. That said, there are certain surfaces that you may want to adjust this sensitivity up in order to capture them a little better. Now, the higher you go with the slider, the more noise it lets in. The more noise you have, the longer your data is going to take to process, and that noise can also ruin your small details on the object. So there's certain things where if you have to adjust this to the extreme and you're still getting bad data, you'll want to treat that object. We won't get into that right now, but there are certain things you can do to object surfaces to make them scan better without having to adjust sensitivity. Typically on the space spider, you don't want to adjust this more than maybe a quarter of the way up this bar for the most ideal results. Anything above that, you'll just get a whole lot of noise. Again, it can work for certain things, but just keep that in mind as far as kind of a rule of thumb. Now on the EVA and on the EVA Lite, you don't have to worry about that. The sensitivity bar is automatically adjusted by the software based on whatever the scanner is seeing. So it makes it quite easy. All right, so those are the things that I check every single time. Now, I do want to mention just 2 other things here. So in the features to track here, most of the time you want to just leave it on geometry plus texture. What that means is it's going to use not only all of these geometry variations, which is the shape of the object itself, but it also uses the color variations in order to track itself and place all those frames that it's capturing correctly. So that's what you want to use most of the time. Now, if you have the EVA Lite connected, I'll show you what that looks like. The EVA Lite does not have any texture features at all, and this is what you'll see. There'll be only the geometry option, it'll be automatically selected, and that's all you have. So you don't have to worry about whether you're changing that or not. But again, for the other scanners that do have the other options, you're going to leave it on geometry plus texture most of the time. And then the final thing I want to mention here, actually there's two more things here. I want to talk about real-time fusion real quick. So I showed you normal scanning. This is normal scanning right here. So it shows the color texture and it's showing the raw data that it is currently capturing, right? So that's normal scanning. Real-time fusion, if you click that, and you have to have a supported video card in order to use this. If I click real-time fusion, my preview still looks the same, but when I start scanning, the scan actually looks a lot different. So as I am scanning, it is taking all that raw data that it's capturing behind the scenes, get a little far there, and it's putting it all together in real time, creating a fusion, which is your end result normally when you process the data, but it's creating the fusion in real time, hence the name real-time fusion. So what this is great for is when I stop scanning here, you can see I have two different things, and this is from that other scan. I am left with the raw scan data, so I can still go through and process that data as usual if I want to, but I also have the real-time fusion. Now this is, I like to call this a low-resolution preview of what your end result would look like, because it is lower resolution typically, and it's potentially less accurate, and it's going to look a little messier. Again, those are general terms there. It's not going to be like that in every single case, but this is great if, maybe I just wanted a quick shape of this sumo character to pull into a software somewhere, and I didn't care so much if it's a little messy. I just need that general shape as a reference for something. Real-time fusion is a great way to just take your quick scan. I can go into my editor and just get rid of all this stuff floating around it and export this without any additional processing work. So that's a nice feature right there. Doesn't work well for every application, but it's something to know about. All right, and then one final thing. I don't remember if this is enabled by default. I think it is. But enable automatic base removal. So if this is checked, when I start my preview, you get this message at the top of the software that says direct your scanner at the base that supports the object. So what I'm going to do, notice when I get down here and it can detect that flat base, it puts a grid out there showing that it's detected the base. Now I can start scanning, it keeps that grid right there. Now I'm going to scan all the way around this object. Alright, so I've scanned my object. Now when I stop and close my scan tab, it'll run its fine registration of course, but then it runs the automatic base removal and automatically removes that flat surface that it detected during scanning. That can save you a lot of time if you have a lot of scans. It can save you a lot of editing time at the end when you're done scanning before you go into processing. So that's just a nice little feature that, again, it's not great for every single scan out there. It works really well for the Artec EVA, especially because you may be scanning a person or a large object and get some of that floor in there, and it does a really, really good job of removing all that. So that's just something to keep in mind. And I believe that's it. There's a lot more settings there, but those are the more important ones and the general order that you would want to check.
Hizalama ve kayıt. Kayıt ve hizalama araçları benzer görevleri yerine getirir, ancak bunlar farklıdır. Ayrıntılar hakkında fikir edinmek için aşağıdaki tabloyu kullanın. Taramaları düzenleme. Taramaları düzenlemek için yan panelden düzenleyiciyi açın ve silgi aracını seçin. Taranan verileri yönlendirmek için konumlandırma aracını veya dönüştürme aracını da kullanabilirsiniz. Gürültüyü ortadan kaldırma, aşırı değer kaldırma. Tarama işlemi sırasında sahnede aykırı değerler görünebilir. Aykırı değerler, ana yüzeylere bağlı olmayan küçük yüzeylerdir. Modeli bozabilecekleri veya istenmeyen parçalar üretebilecekleri için çıkarılması gerekir. Stüdyo, aykırı değerleri ortadan kaldırmak için 2 yol sunar. Bunları birleştirmeden önce, önleyici yaklaşım veya birleştirmeden sonra silin. Gürültülü özelliklerin ana yüzeye yapışmasını önleyerek yanlış füzyon olasılığını azalttığı için eski yaklaşımı kullanmanızı öneririz. Tarama bölümlerini silme, silgi. Neredeyse her zaman, tarama işlemi duvarlar, operatörün elleri, nesnenin bulunduğu yüzeyler ve diğer yabancı nesneler gibi istenmeyen öğeleri yakalayacaktır. Bu istenmeyen veriler, son işlemeyi engelleyebilir. Bu sorunu önlemek için, işlemeden önce bu nesneleri ortadan kaldırmanızı öneririz. Silgi, istenmeyen öğeleri sahneden hızlı ve kolay bir şekilde kaldırmak için çeşitli seçenekler sunar. Bir yan araç çubuğunu kullanarak düzenleyici panelini açın. Silgi aracını tıklayın. 3 çalışma alanı panelinde bir veya daha fazla tarama seçin. 4 editör panelinde gerekli seçim türünü seçin. 5 belirli bir modun talimatlarına bakın ve taramalarda silmek istediğiniz bölgeleri seçin. Tüm seçimleri temizlemek için seçimi kaldırı tıklayın. Altı kırmızıyla vurgulanan alanı ortadan kaldırmak veya kesme düzlemi uygulamak için sile tıklayın. Değişiklikleri geri alma için çalışma alanı panelinde veya menüsünde düzenle öğesini tıklayın. Sil düğmesinin her tıklanması, bir komut geçmişi girişi oluşturur. Birkaç işlemi geri almak için, düğmesinin açılır menüsünü kullanın, geri alma ve en düşük girişi seçin. Tablodan seçenekleri görebilirsiniz.
The eraser tool within Artex Studio is quite powerful, but still very easy to use. So this tool works on both raw scan data and fuse data, and I'll go over how to use it with both. We're going to start with the raw scan data, so I have that selected over here in my workspace. I'm going to come over on the left-hand side and click the Editor tab, and then click the Eraser. So the most common thing you're going to do, one of the more common things you're going to do with the Eraser tool is this cutoff plane selection. So if you're not using the auto base removal in the scan tab, you will be left with bases or whatever your scanned item was sitting on when you were scanning it. And the cutoff plane selection within the eraser tool makes it very easy to get rid of that. So something to keep in mind here when you're using the eraser tool. What might be helpful is sometimes coming up here and changing this to the points view. That can be easier to see things. By default is going to be on the solid view. So you can play around with the view options to make sure you're able to see everything the way you need to, so that you're not erasing things that you shouldn't be. Notice sometimes in the solid view, the points will kind of make these spikes around these edges, and you might not really be able to see very well around those edges. So I can come to my points view, and it cleans up those edges a lot more in your view. Again, you're just looking at raw data, so this is just changing how it's displaying it. So I'll leave it at the points for this one. I'm going to use the cutoff plane selection. Whenever you use the eraser, you'll select your selection mode over here on the left, and then you'll come over on the right, you'll hold the control key, and then nothing's going to happen until you move your mouse a little bit. And then you'll see that this little selection circle pops up. Now, I can use my mouse wheel to scroll up and down to make it larger or smaller, and then if I left click, it's going to select data. So I'm going to position this like this, hold control, scroll down a little, I just want a small circle here, and just paint a little bit right there. And then with the selection tool, I like to paint a little bit on either side of the object, just to give it a nice data set to kind of average that out. And then what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold Control and Shift, and then move my mouse a little bit. The circle will pop up again, but what I'm going to do this time is just scroll up on my mouse wheel while holding Control and Shift, and notice that just lets me move my plane up and down. Most of the time when you select the base, it'll kind of look like this with a little bit above, a little below. It depends on what kind of base it was. This one, the turntable that I was using for the scan has a lot of raised geometry on it, so it's not going to be able to find the exact surface there. But it will get close, and then you hold Control Shift, and normally if you just click up once on your mouse wheel, that's enough. Now keep in mind that when you do this, when you click up once, it may cut off a little bit of the bottom of your model here. And this is kind of hard to see. Again, let's move back to the solid view. And notice it may be cutting into my model just a little bit. That's not a big deal if you have multiple scans. So I have, when I scanned this object, I turned it over on its side and I scanned underneath the feet anyway in a separate scan. So getting rid of a little bit of that data isn't really a big deal. But that is something to keep in mind when you're using the tool. So I can click Erase, and everything above that plane stays and everything below gets erased. So that's the most commonly used option within with raw data. And I can come in here, I can do 2D selection, just kind of paint and erase things. I can do all kinds of stuff. When you're using the eraser tool, keep in mind that you can also undo things that you erase. So don't be afraid to that you're going to lose something immediately, because you should be able to come back and click Control-Z or the undo button up here in the workspace, right above the workspace, and that will get back what you just erased if you ever erase anything accidentally. All right, I'm going to switch over to some fused data. This is a fusion created from the data, and we're going to look at the other eraser options. So 2D selection, by default, if I just click, again I held Control and then left clicked, by default it's going to go all the way through the model. So there may be some times where you don't want that to happen. This select through option here up in the top view bar, if you deselect that and then come over here, I'm going to paint a little bit right here. Notice it only painted the one side of the model. So that's really handy. That's just something to keep in mind. Now, in conjunction with the select through, let's say for some reason this fusion had something fused on the inside or some sort of feature maybe that wrapped around inside or something that you were able to get with multiple scans, and then you aligned it all and you can no longer get to a portion of the model that you need to work on. You can come in here, I'm just going to use the 2D selection, and I'm going to click Hide. So this Hide button here will hide whatever is currently selected. It's not erasing it, it's not a preview of what the model will look like once you click Erase. It's just to hide that data that you just selected. And then let's say there was something here on the backside. Now I could come in and select some things here, click Erase, and now everything that I hid comes back, and then what I had selected gets erased. And it did erase on the backside here because when I hid that, it put a hole through there, and I actually had selected it on the front and backside here. I just overlapped. So that's why there's a hole on the backside as well. I'm going to click undo. Another option here would be if you go to the eraser, I think this might be a better option. Maybe you want to come in here and select something that you don't want to get rid of. You want to be able to erase a bunch of stuff without worrying. You want to be really careful, with a certain portion. And then, of course, I don't have select through enabled here, which would be handy for this one. So, maybe I wanted to be really careful with all that, make sure I didn't erase anything on it. So I could click hide. And then I could come in and erase a whole bunch of stuff here. Now I'm left with that, and everything else that I selected is erased. So I don't use that hide tool very often, but it is there in case you run into some sort of situation where you need it. All right, we'll go back into the eraser. So that's 2D selection. And again, don't forget about the select through option. 3D selection brings up a sphere that you can make larger, smaller, and everything within the sphere is going to be selected. And the center of that sphere is the surface of the model where your mouse pointer is. So this is handy, for going over the surface. Maybe if you wanted to follow the surface of the object and erase like that. So that's another option, the 3D selection tool. Rectangular selection, exactly what it sounds like. Hit Control. This is kind of a standard option in most editing tools. Hold Control, drag, let go, and it's going to select a rectangular portion. We'll undo that, go back in the eraser. Lasso selection is another nice tool. Some people are very used to using this in their own program, so it's nice to have this in here. I'm going to hold Control again, come up here, and do my lasso selection. When I let go, it closes it off and selects everything. A lot of times with the lasso tool, when people see that there's a lasso tool, they ask if there's a way to invert the selection. There is not currently a way to do that, unfortunately. Okay? And that should be it. Yes. If you ever find yourself needing to change your perspective view because you're not able to make correct cuts or edits, you can go to View and say, change from perspective view, which is the default, to orthogonal view. And that can help with your selection a lot of times as well, and maybe lining things up properly and then erasing. It's just another tool to set yourself up for proper erasing and editing of your models. And that's it for the eraser.
Destekleyici yüzeyi silme. Stüdyo, silme alanını nasıl seçtiğiniz konusunda geleneksel fırçalardan farklı olan iki seçim modu sunar. İlk olarak, nesnenin üzerinde durduğu düz yüzeyi belirtirsiniz. Ardından, uygulamaya temel düzlemi belirler ve altındaki alanı seçer ya da taramayı iki parçaya bölen bir kesme düzlemi oluşturur. Birincisi kalır ve ikincisi silinir. Bu uçağı ihtiyacınız olan herhangi bir şekilde yönlendirebilirsiniz. Tarama hizalaması. Stüdyo sürekli tarama özelliğine sahip olsa da uygulamanın çoklu taramaların göreli konumları hakkında yeterli bilgiye sahip olmadığı bazı durumlar olabilir. Tüm taramaları tek bir bütün halinde birleştirmek için verileri tek bir koordinat sistemine dönüştürmeniz gerekir, yani hizalama aracını kullanarak hizalama yapmanız gerekir. Hizalama için taramaları seçme. Çalışma alanı panelinde, birlikte çalışmayı düşündüğünüz tüm taramaları işaretlemek için bayrağı kullanın. Yan panelde hizalayı tıkladığınızda, işaretli taramalar, önceden seçilmiş olan sol panelde, çalışma alanı panelinde göründükleri sırayla görünecektir. Align işlemi sırasında, stüdyo seçilen taramaları iki gruba ayırır. Hizalanmış taramalar ve hizalanmamış taramalar. İlk set başlangıçta yalnızca bir tarama içerir, bu mavi renkte vurgulanır. Adı kalın olarak görünür ve aynı renk simgesini kullanır. Ancak otomatik hizalama, birkaç hizalanmış tarama grubu üretebilir. Hizalama modlarının özeti. Tablo, çeşitli hizalama modları hakkında temel bilgiler sağlar. Bir tarama türü, belirli bir modda kullanabileceğiniz taramaları listeler. İki işlem başına tarama, belirli bir modu kullanmak için gereken tarama sayısıdır. 3 kümedeki işaretçiler, bir nokta kümesinde kaç tane işaretçi eşleyebileceğinizi belirtir. Bazı modlar nokta kümeleri gerektirir, ancak bazıları gerektirmez. 4 işaretçilerin gereksiz olduğu anlamına gelir. 5-0 veya 2, nokta belirtiminin isteğe bağlı olduğu anlamına gelir ve bunları belirtirseniz yalnızca işaretçi çiftlerine izin verilir. 6, en az bir sette sınırsız sayıda işaret belirtebileceğiniz anlamına gelir.
Let's look at the manual alignment process within Artex Studio. I have Artex Studio 11 open here. I'm going to come over to my workspace and select or activate the 3 scans that I want to align. And then I'm going to come over to the left-hand side of the screen and click the Align tab. And we are now within the manual alignment screen. So in the window here, where you have your 3D data, you can just navigate, zoom in, rotate the model, just like you normally would outside of the manual alignment screen. You can double-click anywhere on your model, and that will change the rotation point. I don't know if you can see that, but it puts a little red dot wherever you double-click. That can be helpful when you're working with both registered and unregistered data, which we'll talk about in a second. So first of all, when you come into the manual alignment screen, one of these scans, the first scan, will be marked as registered. That means it's going to stay exactly where it is, no matter what you do with the other scans. Everything else is going to be aligned to that scan. You could have more than one scan registered. Let's say that you've aligned things before, and then you've left the alignment screen, went back, scanned a little bit more, added some more data, and then you come back, and maybe you've already aligned scan 1 and scan 2. You could just right-click, mark scan 2 as registered. In this case, I'm not lined up, but if I had already gone through that process, mark everything you've already aligned as registered, and you'll be good to go. That way you don't have to go back through the process each time. So a quick shortcut to mark things registered and unregistered would be to double-click. That marks it as registered. Double-click it again, and it marks it as unregistered. So it may be that you don't want to align everything to scan 1 or whatever the first scan in the list is. Maybe you want to align everything to, let's say, scan 3 in this case. So I can just come down here, either right-click, say mark as registered, and that'll register it, meaning everything else will be aligned to scan 3 now. Or, of course, you can double-click again just to toggle. But I do want to use scan 1 for registering, so that's what I'm going to do. Now, the manual alignment process involves your registered scan and an unregistered scan, which you can click down here. And when it's unregistered, it shows up as green over here. It's not bold. And when I click over here in my scan data window, notice everything's moving together. But if I hold Shift, all of my movement applies only to the unregistered scan data. And again, this is where double clicking can be helpful. If you double click on your model, that'll change your rotation point and make things a little easier. Because what you want to do with manual alignment is visually line them up. I like to put them side by side so I can see common points. And then you can click points within each scan. Now, something else to keep in mind, let's say you lost tracking during scanning and you have multiple scans that are lined up. In order to not have to go through the alignment process individually, you can actually come over here and select multiple unregistered scans to move around all at once. So if I come over here to my scan list and hold the Control key and click on another scan, it adds it. And now when I move things, when I hold Shift and move my unregistered scans, those scans move together. So that's very helpful. Let's say these two were already aligned and I wanted to align both of them at the same time to scan one. I could just select them both at the same time there in the screen. All right. So at any point, if you want to undo something, you can just click the undo button up here in the top left like I just did. So let's look at actually moving this data around and aligning it. So I've selected scan 2 over here. I'm holding Shift and I'm going to, I did move my rotation point. And I'm going to just line them up visually. Now when I'm picking points here, there's a couple different things I can do. I want to pick 3 common points in this scan data. So let's say his nose, one of these knuckles, and maybe a toe. Notice I didn't try picking a large flat or smooth area, like out in the middle of his stomach or something. That could work, but you're going to be a whole lot less likely to actually be in the same spot if you don't have something that comes to a point or a specific feature that you're clicking on. So that's why I like to pick stuff like I did here with the toes, knuckles, and his nose. And they're all on different planes and different areas. You kind of want to pick diverse spots all over the model. And again, just 3 points is usually enough, 3 common points. So I've clicked my points there. If you're having trouble seeing either the texture points or geometry points that you need to click on, you can actually come up here to your view options, and there's a couple different things you can do to make it easier to pick these points. This lighting button, if you have something that's really dark or you're just having trouble seeing geometry, or sorry, not geometry, but color texture features that you were planning on using to align, like maybe you drew some X's on an object or some numbers or something to help you line up a symmetrical object, then sometimes it can be difficult to see those markings. Toggling this lighting option up here can help sometimes. Something else that helps, sometimes your texture is really dark and you're not using it for alignment. You can come up here and change your view from texture to scan color. And notice how that geometry got a lot easier to see. So that can help a lot. And then also, with very noisy scans, a lot of times it can help to come in here and instead of a solid view, change it to points view. And it doesn't really help much on this scan. Actually, it might make it worse on this scan. But it can help on very noisy scan data. So just a couple things to keep in mind. A couple options to make your life easier when you're picking points, common points between scans. Okay, so after I pick my common points here, there's a couple things I could do. This Align Markers button does exactly what it sounds like. It's not actually aligning the scans, but it's going to align the points that you clicked. So I could click Align Markers, And now my scans are close, but they're not actually aligned. You could use that just to make sure that you clicked the right points before clicking the align button. On this model, it wasn't really a big deal. It's an easy model, so I wasn't going to get any points mixed up. Also, maybe you're having trouble aligning the scans at all. You could click common points that you know should be really close, click align markers, and then you could try global registration. That's not really the recommended route, honestly, but it does give you another option. Sometimes that could work. What's really recommended is if you're going through this manual process and you're just not getting enough, you're not able to pick common points, or the common points you're picking just aren't working. You may not have enough data, you may not have enough geometry overlap. So what's the best route there is probably to go back and scan again, add some more scan data, just get a little more information so that you can align things properly. So that's align markers. In the little alignment section here, this align button will come in and align the object. And I just clicked that, and it went pretty quickly with this. It's a very small scan, but it usually does work pretty quickly. There is another option here, enable texture alignment. So honestly, you want to keep that off most of the time. But where you will probably need to use that is anytime where you added texture, let's say X marks or some sort of additional color data to your scan model in order for it to scan properly. Let's say you were scanning a sphere with very little geometry, or a cylinder, or something like that with hardly any geometry variation, something that's symmetrical that the scanner would have trouble tracking across. Adding X marks or scribbles or something like that, you could add dots, whatever you want to do to the model will help with the tracking, but that also means that later on, when you go to align, when you go to run your global registration, some of your other algorithms, you'll have to run it with geometry plus texture, and that's what this does. When you click that, instead of just looking at common geometry, it's going to use the color data as well to help with the alignment. Most of the time, you probably want to keep that off unless you have trouble with regular alignment, because it does take longer and it can cause it to fail. Only if you have bad texture, of course. Okay, and that's the manual alignment process. That's the standard rigid alignment. That's what we covered here, just this first tab. These other two tabs are more, they're not as simple. They're more advanced, I guess you could say. They're more advanced ways of aligning things, where if you really want to get into those, there is some really good information in the Artex Studio manual. When you're done, make sure you click the apply button